The power of the pin. We're talking CFI endorsements today in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong.
And I'm Dan Milliken. In the Hangar is sponsored by Wingfield Aviation. Service and transparency, that's where you'd want to go for your aircraft maintenance.
Today, we're here with DPE Joe Johnson. Thank you so much for coming back.
Joe,
welcome.
Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yes, sir.
All right, well, we're talking today about CFI endorsements. And the reason why this came about is we were talking with Joe, and we were asking, what's some of the endorsement issues that you see? I mean, we're just trying to gather some information, and the first thing that Joe came up with was?
The endorsements,
All
CFI
right.
endorsements.
So what's going on?
Well, oftentimes what happens when we try to get started on the check ride, we're missing endorsements or we don't have the proper endorsements in a lot of cases. I just had an example of that today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I had an applicant who came for a retest. And in a retest situation, you have to have your 61.49 endorsement, which is your retest after failure. And his instructor had given him a 61.39 endorsement. And I asked the instructor to explain to me why he did a 61.39 versus a 61.49. And he says, well, doesn't he have to have the 2 calendar month endorsement? It's completely, negating the fact that he's failed his test once and now has to take it again and needs this endorsement to cover it. So we had to stop and give the instructor a moment to correct the endorsement before we could continue the ride.
But the instructor was there?
He was there, which
So
is a
sometimes that
very
can
big
happen.
plus. That's if you have the instructor available during the course of your test, at least during the initial stages of the test, that's a really big plus because if we find that there are missing endorsements or endorsements that need correcting, we can make those at that time.
So what happens if a pilot candidate is there, but their instructor is not, and they have to have corrected endorsements? What happens then?
If we can reach the instructor, and this is purely, this is DPE to DPE, technique or personal preferences. Oftentimes you can have with today's electronic world technology, we can have the instructor write the endorsement and scan it, send it in a text, send it in an email. We can print it right on the spot, add it to the logbook, and oftentimes we're good to go.
Okay. Excellent.
But not every DPE is going to take that. So it's up to the individual DPE if he wants to take that, scanned endorsement. So
Gotcha.
Okay, so that was a situation today where the CFI didn't write the correct endorsement, but you're seeing situations where the endorsement's being overused or misused?
That's correct. Overused or misused. And one example, and again, all the victims will remain nameless.
Right.
But in one example, I had an applicant show up for a check ride, and this particular school utilized a sheet of endorsements that had, from A to Z, if you will, all the endorsements. And the instructor just went through from the top to bottom and signed every one of them and dated them all the same date. And so, of course, the very first endorsement at the top was for the written test. And so I asked the instructor to come explain to me how he had a written test that was dated 3 months prior to the date that he gave him the endorsement to actually take the test. And why did he have a retest endorsement on his form when he had not even taken the test and failed it yet? So he was over-endorsing, and his opinion was well, more is better.
Just sign everything?
Just sign everything. And that's when I said to him, as Christy said in her intro, the power of the pen, I go, you're misusing the power of the pen.
Yeah, I can see that. What about, so I know a lot of the logbooks too, they come with those standardized endorsements.
That's correct. A lot of the logbooks have pre-printed endorsements. In most cases, if you fill those out, sign them, you're going to be okay. However, they're not 100% complete. They may be missing some that you need, or there's not an adequate amount of them in there as well.
So true story, my husband Steve,
Yeah.
who taught me how to fly, in an act of symbology, gave me an old logbook that he had, my first logbook was one that he gave me that he'd had since 2002.
Right.
So it was missing some wording and just endorsements in general. So I wound up
It
not.
was back when they used charcoal?
Yeah, basically. But the regulations change and the endorsements change, and that's why we have the 6165 and they update it,
That's
exactly. So,
Right.
so you go and you compare it with the 6165, AC, and you're looking at it going, that doesn't look quite right. So we wound up just writing out most of my endorsements because you couldn't use the pre-written ones in there. So I encourage all CFIs Now, hey, if your student comes with those pre-written logbooks, don't just blindly sign it. Make sure it actually matches.
That's a very good point, because the wording may have changed. Oftentimes, if they're doing an add-on rating, there's no written test associated with it, but yet the endorsement previously had the deficiencies noted in the endorsement, and it's not required. Most examiners will accept that. Not all of them will, because it's not properly worded. So ultimately what will happen is it will come down to the attorneys once there's an incident or an accident.
Right. And that's why it comes down to DPE, DPE, correct? Because one DPE is going to take it really seriously, just in case, and one may not necessarily think it's a case. Okay, here's a question for you. What about the TSA endorsement? Do you see any issues or a lot of issues with students having that TSA endorsement in their logbook?
So on the TSA endorsement, I like to refer to that as a feel-good endorsement. Makes
There
me
you
feel good that I gave you that endorsement.
Yeah.
What is a TSA endorsement?
You want to answer that?
Sure. So basically, it states that the flight instructor that gave the instruction has confirmed that the student is in fact a United States citizen, national, or otherwise. So basically, what it's a post 9/11 thing.
Right, where you have to give yeah.
Exactly. So we have to look at a passport or birth certificate or some government issued, something, and then we have to notate that we saw that we got passport number ... Now, like, we actually have to log that in their logbook as their passport number or whatever, showing that we actually saw it, looked at it, and endorsed them for it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. In mine, I know that I presented my passport because I had it handy. I don't remember seeing that as an endorsement in my logbook. Maybe it's there. I just don't
So
remember.
to expand on what Christy's stating is Part 1552 of the title is what brought this all about. And it had to do with flight schools, and it's now part of our FAR Aims, the Bible that we carry.
Right.
And it defines what a flight school is, what records have to be maintained, and so on. And it says that each flight school shall verify that the applicant is an American citizen before conducting flight training, or they shall have TSA blessings, if you will, to receive this flight training.
Oh, so the TSA endorsement would be for a foreign student.
No, sir, that's not entirely correct. So,
Okay, all right.
No.
so the endorsement, again, is a feel-good endorsement, and I use that terminology because it's not a required endorsement. What is required per Part 1552 is that you as an instructor, assuming that Christy walked in and said, hey, I would like to learn how to fly, Dan, can you teach me? He says, yes, Christy, but I need to verify that you're a U.S. citizen, and if you're not, then I got to send you down to the Homeland Security to get you validated before I can start this flight training. A lot of instructors, once they've done that, and she's presented her credentials to show that she is in fact a U.S. citizen, they will make an endorsement in the logbook that says, I checked this. I did my
Right,
job.
I guess that's what I'm
checked
saying. Yeah,
this."
because they checked it, but they didn't write anything down in my
That's
logbook.
correct. What is actually required of you as an instructor per Part 1552 is that you keep a record for 5 years
Yeah.
that you checked it, which would be a copy of her passport or her birth certificate or
Right.
whatever are the credentials that she has to prove her citizenship.
Well, so when I went to go do my, my private pilot check ride, the DPE would not proceed forward because Steve had not given that. He hadn't put
But
anything
it
in my
wasn't
logbook.
required.
According to the DPE, it was.
Well, it's not, but according to
1552 is not required.
Yeah.
you should have
He-
said that to him. You just said, 1552 says I don't have to have it.
It wasn't.
Come on, be strong to your DPE.
Well, my instructor.
That would have gone well for
That would not have ended well.
Exactly. My
Yeah.
instructor was there for my check ride, so it was a non-issue. He was able, and I had my passport, and I just happened to be married to him too. So
that kinda helps.
Yeah, exactly. So that worked out, but
So the takeaway is to marry your instructor?
I was.
Makes life so much easier.
It makes
Oh,
it a little
does
bit
it?
easier. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
we're gonna have Steve on the show for our next
Right,
episode of In the
right.
Hangar. We'll talk about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I've had numerous folks who want to get their CFIs either reinstated or stated so that they can teach their spouses, and I always remind them they need to get a really good divorce attorney before they start down this venture.
Well, I will say, now that we've gone off on the rabbit trail for a minute, I will say, seeing you and Steve and knowing what you went through and everything else, it's been amazing that you guys have had such a harmonious training.
That we still like each other?
There's that, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't always harmonious, but yeah, you're correct.
Okay, I just know, first of all, my wife would never even get into the cockpit, but I just know that would not have been good, period. No. So Kudos.
Well, thank you. Anyway,
All right. Back to
All right, back to 1552. Feel-good endorsements. What else is a feel-good endorsement?
Well, it's a recommended endorsement. If you look in the advisory circular 6165, that's where it states that these are recommended endorsements. So that in itself says that it's not a required endorsement. And then if you look in part 1552, there's no statement in there that you have to make the endorsement. It just says that the flight school must keep a record.
For 5 years.
For 5 years.
Okay.
That's another problem that I run into is that most instructors don't understand what a flight school is, and that definition is found in that same part.
Oh.
And it basically indicates that anyone that provides training on an airplane, up until including just the systems, is a flight school.
So when I teach one of my crew members going on a flight, that's a flight school.
When you teach one of your crew members going on a flight,
So I fly for business for my film and video.
Okay.
So I've got my camera person up in front, and we're just, what
and
the
you're
heck.
just kind of showing him some things.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not a flight school in that
But
situation.
even if I'm logging his book.
So you're a CFI and you're putting it in his logbook.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then you have a requirement under 1552 to validate that
That's
person.
theoretical, by the way, for FISDO listening. I'm just,
To ensure that that person is in fact a U.S. citizen prior to providing that training.
Gotcha.
That is correct. And you have to keep a record of that.
For 5 years.
For 5 years.
Yeah.
That
I knew that,
citizenship.
yeah.
That's correct.
all right.
anyway,
Anyway,
so what are some other issues? Do you get a lot of issues with like the 6139 or anything like
that's
that?
one that's most often left off.
Yeah.
The 6139. So,
For the audience, 6139 is.
okay, so this is basically a recency a training endorsement. It says that you've had your training recently. So what it eliminates is a situation where, Dan, we've trained you, you're ready to take your check ride, we give you the endorsement to take the check ride, and then you get the cold feet and you don't do anything for 6 months. And then you decide to go take the check ride. Well, you haven't had training recently, so they're not going to allow you to take that check ride. The FAA says that training should have occurred within the last 2 calendar months from the date of the check ride, which is essentially 90 days. It's just a different way of saying 90 days. Previously, it was 60 days. It was actually said 60 days prior, but then it went to a 2 calendar month prior to the month of the test, which in essence gives you 90 whole days. So they want to make sure that you're fluent, proficient, current kind of a situation.
You say this is the one most abused as far as being left out. Do you actually have people that would show up for a check ride not being current like
Correct.
that?
Yes.
Really?
So you look back, they have to have had 3 hours of training is one of the requirements, like for their private instrument and commercial,
Right.
In the last 2 calendar months. And you look and you'll see that they haven't flown but maybe 1 or 2 flights. You start adding the hours up and you'll see that they come up to 2.5 hours in the last 3 months. And you go, well, you don't have the 3 hours in the last 2 months.
Why would somebody go to a check ride with 2.5 hours in the last 90 months?
That's 90 months, 90 days.
90 days.
That I could not answer, but I've seen it, and I've seen it on a number of occasions.
Wow.
So when a student shows up and they have these errors and endorsements or whatever, how does that set the tone for the check ride?
Oftentimes, it puts them in an uneasy situation because they feel that as though they've failed already when they haven't even started the test. So they're usually a little nervous now. Things have just amped up quite a bit when I'm questioning them about, well, your instructor didn't do this and your instructor didn't do that. And a lot of people want to own that and say, well, that's my fault. And it's not their fault. It's just as much the instructor's fault for not having done the correct endorsements. And so now I'm usually trying to say, don't worry about it, calm down, let's just get the instructor on the phone. Are they available? We may be able to work this out. And when they can't get them, then they start getting disappointed.
Panic mode.
Panic
starts setting
mode.
in. I know, I'd be
sets in,
panicking.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. Wow.
So,
Okay. So, but for you, though, as a DPE, does it set a tone like, well, this person came unprepared?
to a degree, it sets that tone that they came unprepared because depending on the test that we're doing, if it's an instrument or commercial, particularly,
They should know.
They should know.
But if it's a private, maybe not
Maybe
so
not
much.
so
Maybe
much.
it's your instructor
Right.
didn't.
But once they've been through the process once before, they kind of know how this works. Okay, you should know that you need these items. That's as much your training requirements, as it is his. And particularly with the CFI. I was going to say specifically, but with the CFI, they I don't tell them that, I'm testing them, but I go, you should know what your endorsements are. You're going to be a CFI. Why are you missing these endorsements? This is just as much your responsibility as this guy signing you off to take the test.
Okay, so for the private pilot out there watching this about CFI endorsements, misuse and misunderstandings, what can a private pilot student do to because 6139, that's going to probably go over their heads a little bit.
Right.
What can they do to make sure they're ready for the
eliminate
check ride?
this?
Yeah.
Well, so the student pilot should know what his limitations are. We run into that quite a bit as well. The student pilot basically has a 25-mile perimeter placed upon him from the day he solos. And he can't go beyond that until he's had specific training by regulation, which we call cross-country. And so he's not allowed to leave that perimeter until he's done that. However, in the Metroplex, as you know, the larger airports get quite busy, so we oftentimes will send them to a lateral airport somewhere away from the hometown airport. Hey, we want you to go over here and practice your takeoff and landings, and the regulations even address that under 6193. And it states that the instructor will fly to the other airport with them, make sure they know how to get there, make sure they know how to get home, and then give them an endorsement. And they can do that repeatedly to back and forth to that airport as long as that instructor has gone there, showed them how to get there, showed them how to get home.
Over 25.
Inside 25. Okay, what I've been running into recently is now that as the industry continues to flood with flight training, the airports that we used to go, McKinney, Mesquite, Rockwell, these are all getting saturated with training. So we're starting to see the legs are starting to be stretched out. So now they're going to cattle mills. Now they're going to Terrell and points beyond. And I'll ask, well, where's your base of training? Where'd you solo? And I said, well, I soloed in Addison. Okay? So that's your base of training. That's where you start from when you go to train each day. They go, yeah. And I go, well, Caddo's like 32 miles. And you have an endorsement in your logbook that says you can fly repeatedly back and forth to Cattle Mills, which is not inside the 25 miles. And you've done this. Where's your instructor? We need to have a talk. Because what has happened is the student has been set up for failure, in fact, for violation if caught, and the instructor would be in a violation situation as well. Now,
What do you do in that situation? The student pilot probably had no clue.
he had no idea.
And what do you do?
At that point, I counsel the instructor on what has happened. This is what you did. This is what is incorrect. And we try to seek a resolution to that. Sometimes that actually does involve picking up the phone and calling someone, above me, so to speak, and saying, hey, how do we rectify this? This is what's transpired. It doesn't mean necessarily that it was an intentional or willful violation to where the FAA would want to come down on, but it may involve, someone getting a stern talking to type situation. So that doesn't happen again. Because that's at least the last thing we want is an instructor out there with a pen in his hand giving endorsements that he's either not authorized to do or he doesn't understand what he's doing, and he's sending people out, putting them at risk.
Right.
So what would you like to see the CFIs do better then?
Better endorsements.
Okay.
More accurate endorsements.
More accurate endorsements. That's correct.
You heard it from the man himself. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. All right, you guys, if you like what you see, like, subscribe, share, and join us next time in the hangar.